to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we're meeting on today. Now, as far as I'm aware, there's no other Aboriginal people in the room, but traditionally I would say I'd like to acknowledge elders, as well as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here. But of course I'd like to extend my respects to everybody here in the room. So I'm just going to borrow creatively for a moment from the movie Fight Club. And if you haven't seen it, you should actually watch. Did I see a shake of the head? I'm setting some homework, you need to watch it. You'll actually thank me for it, it's a fantastic movie. But the first rule of speaking on Indigenous issues is no one person actually speaks for all Indigenous people. Same goes for men, same goes for white people, and the same goes for Aboriginal people. So I stand here speaking on my own accord. I feel that's really important to say because sometimes people forget that Aboriginal people aren't all the same. And you can't see that on the surface. I mean, I'm well educated, I'm well spoken, and apparently well adjusted. But it's hard work constantly having to adapt to fit into a culture that's not your own. And you just can't see that. All you can see when I stand here is the armour I put on every day that I step out into a Western world. You can't see the effort that's required to translate my culture and my way of being into something that's palatable for the rest of the world. The burden of change and adaptation should not fall on us alone, and it currently is. So I wanted to ask you a few questions, and you don't actually have to answer them, but I just want you to think about them. So how many of you expect your Indigenous staff to carry the burden of Indigenous issues? Whether it be the RAP, student recruitment and retention, and staff recruitment and retention. To expect us to do all the changing, or to actually not even consider it and maintain the status quo, is to continue the process of colonisation. All I ask is universities meet us halfway, because it's us who actually pays the price for a lack of action. So what got me through uni? Well, the first time, to be quite honest, I dropped out. I didn't feel comfortable at uni. I didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't have anyone that I actually knew had gone to uni, other than the people who taught me at school. And I was a really good student at school. I was completely out of my depth. So when I went back to uni, what kept me at uni was a person, Michael McDaniel from UTS. Fabulous man, love him. He was actually at Macquarie Uni when I was there. So he actually created a network of Aboriginal people at the uni, academics, support workers and students. So I found a home, and that's actually what kept me there. It wasn't smooth sailing. I have to say I was surprised and somewhat naive, I have to say, on reflection, because I didn't realise that non-Indigenous people would be teaching Indigenous subjects. To be honest with you, I found those classes disappointing at best and upsetting at worst. It's kind of like a woman trying to explain to a man what it means to be a man. It was unsettling. So for my masters, I was a little bit wiser. I actually interviewed universities, and I mean literally interviewed them. I had a list of questions and I would call universities, and I wanted to make sure they were culturally appropriate before I stepped foot there, because I realised all of a sudden I had currency. When I graduate, I make you fellas look good. So, and not only was it the cultural competency that kept me at uni, it was also a community. I worked for an Aboriginal organisation, and my course coordinator understood some of the issues that I was facing. So that was really nice. And with my PhD, I did exactly the same. I have an Aboriginal supervisor. I sit when I'm actually in South Australia with an Aboriginal unit, which has 55 Aboriginal staff. 55. So we're out there. And again, it's a community, a home. So community has helped me with all my degrees, and I think it's actually a community which universities need to foster. So one of the advantages of having a community is a voice. So non-Indigenous people should not be speaking on our behalf. You may have noticed I have a voice, and so many other Aboriginal people do too. What we need is a space. David's given that to me tonight, so thank you. So I expect to see Indigenous people's voices preferenced and prioritised. And once you've got a critical mass, you can actually do that. Because to be honest, being a lone wolf is a really hard job and at times impossible. So I'd just like for you to think for a second, how many Aboriginal staff do you guys have? So once a community is being developed, it is their voice you should be amplifying on our issues. We shouldn't just be consulted on issues affecting us, we should be making those decisions. And that means letting go of some of your hard-won power. And deans have a lot of power. The hierarchical nature of universities is excluding us from the decision making. Now, I appreciate at universities there are Aboriginal roles, and some of those people I know quite well, like Pro Vice Chancellor Bronwyn Fredericks at CQU, deans such as Peter Riddell at Canberra University, and of course Peter Butskin, who unfortunately could not be here tonight. When it comes to our issues, we need a collective of people because we have such varied experiences and expertise. Just like not all white people are the same, not all white fellas are the same either. So it's actually time for non-Indigenous people to stop pretending they are our solution and realise we are. It's time to recognise while non-Indigenous Australians are making decisions on our behalf, they're actually part of the problem. Hey, we're going to make mistakes. To be honest with you, we will, but I know we're going to do a damn sight better than what's happening for us currently. I mean, the status quo isn't working for us. You know the statistics. Deficit is something which was mentioned in my bio, and it's something that I talk about a lot. So it's not just the power imbalance that's holding us back. For the most part, deficit is the predominant dialogue around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Chelsea Bond said, charting a community's deficit only seems to deepen the despair. Do you know, as Aboriginal people, we don't see ourselves in deficit. And as it was said, I always say we're not the sum total of our negative statistics. And unfortunately, universities and schools tend to focus on our deficit and our strengths. I wrote some curriculum actually for Year 7 to Year 10 with Oxfam around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. And when I looked at the Aboriginal curriculum, one of the things I noticed was it all focused on our deficits. So what we did with that curriculum was actually focus on our strengths and actually ask students to go out and see what it means to be Aboriginal from our point of view. And if we're only ever seen as deficit, how will we ever be trusted to actually run our own affairs? So this is not to say there's not a space for non-Indigenous people. There clearly is. We're only 3% of the population. We can't do it all by ourselves. What we need is allies, allies who will champion our causes our way, who will assist us to facilitate a process which we define and use their privilege to our advantage. And I don't know how much this is challenging you guys. I know some of you are going to be on board, some of you are probably halfway there, and some of you, I don't know, we'll see. But I say it quite frequently, so I'm an ex-drama teacher. So I like to use a theatre analogy, which is Aboriginal people need to be the actors, directors and producers on things affecting us. Non-Aboriginal people need to be the backstage crew. So you're there to support us. And to be honest with you, I stand here because of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. I mean, my mum, Rhonda Finlay, always gets a call out, but people like Professor Alex Brown, who's my supervisor, Jess Scott, Les Mauser, Lisa Briggs, Dr. Scott Winch, Jill Gallagher and Professor Karen Adams, and the list could go on. Non-Indigenous people such as my dad, Mark Finlay, Melissa Sweet, Professor Jenny Judd, Associate Professor Murray Williams, Kerry Lucas, Michael Moore and John Hendry, and of course David, who I'm here with tonight. So what do universities need to do? Well, universities need to be decolonised. So what does that actually look like in practice? Here's some suggestions. It's not an exhaustive list, but there's some things to start the conversation. So one thing I would actually say is please include us at the beginning of conversations. Often I find we're an afterthought and we're added on at the end, and it's really hard to actually make an impact when you're tacked on at the end. I'd hope that you're working towards a critical mass of Indigenous people, at the very least. The percentage of population in which you actually work. Newcastle's 10%, Sydney's 2.2%, you know. Please please do more than recognise us during NAIDOC week. There is nothing more that irritates an Indigenous person than just doing something on NAIDOC week. That's like the bare minimum. And also I ask, please don't expect Indigenous peoples to do all the heavy lifting on decolonising. Ask us what you guys can do to help. And the other thing is, we need Indigenous people in leadership positions. So what I would ask is you support and mentor up and coming Indigenous academics. So the people I've listed, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, are the reason why I know we can actually start a decolonising process, because they're already doing it. So this is not an impossible feat. So just a few questions I'd like to leave you with is, how can you prioritise Aboriginal voices? How can your universities create a community for Indigenous people? And how can you decolonise yourselves and your universities?
One of the real challenges is there are a few Indigenous people in the university.
Yes.
So on one hand, nothing about us without us. On the other hand, we don't want to load that person with absolutely every issue. How do we work in that tension?
Yeah, I have that. I understand that. So one of the things I'd actually say is that academia is a really specific field, whether it be in any discipline, but Aboriginal people know communities really, really well. So at NCIE, the National Centre for Indigenous Excellence, which is here in Sydney, just down the road in Redfern, they have an auntie and uncle in residence. So people don't have to be in academia to actually have an impact on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and actually share their understanding with you. So look, I really appreciate that we are few and far in between, and we were discussing before that we're 3% of the population and yet we have a higher burden of disease. And I found out just recently in the Hunter Valley region, 20% of people on the NDIS are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So we have a high burden of everything and there's very few of us. But look outside your field would be my response. I mean, my mum works at Toronto High as the Career and Transitions Officer. I mean, drawing on people that are working in communities in likewise, similar roles. Anyone else?
Thank you for a very inspiring talk. You talked about the lack of role models that are available, and my concern is the very low number of role models that we have as teachers in Australia across schools. And with the introduction now of the government's language and numeracy testing regime that is being introduced, my fear is that the opportunity for Indigenous people to be able to be successful will be again attacked through that. Do you have any comments to say about then how we can both ensure a quality standard across the system, including for Indigenous people, but at the same time ensure that where there are pressures on Indigenous people to be able to meet those standards, we have better ways of actually being able to address this.
Yeah.
Because I think this is a real concern, not from the Northern Territory, a particular problem, an issue that we're going to have to address, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to do that.
Yeah, look, Northern Territory's probably more challenging in a lot of ways than other environments. So I'm going to speak more generally, if you don't mind, than just specifically about the Northern Territory. So again, I'm going to draw on some of the conversations that I've had with my mum, who is a Career and Transitions Officer at a local high school. And we have kids that are getting through school that can't read. And that's a reflection of teachers. So if we're talking about literacy and numeracy, that is a reflection, unfortunately, on the current education system. And to be quite honest with you, if they get to year 7 and 8 and they can't read and write, they're not going to transition into an 8R. So my comment is I think we need to invest significantly in early childhood education. And there is going to be a period where you've got that gap. So you're investing, it's going to take a long time for those mob to end up getting to uni. But if we don't start it now, we're going to be in the same situation. So there's no quick fixes in terms of today, but for next generations coming through, I think we can do better.